This week, Merritt Maxim from Forrester is with us to discuss their 2024 Security Planning Report. Then Ryan Freed from Mandiant tells us how to get the most out of our tabletops. Finally, in the enterprise security news, Cato Networks raises an eye-watering $238 million with a $3 billion valuation. In this market, Hidden Layer raises $50 million to secure AI LLMs. CrowdStrike acquires Bionic.ai. Rumors about Palo Alto picking up Talon. Suspiciously terrible terms of service changes by tech companies. Why IT ops and security should get along better. Microsoft misplaces 38 terabytes of data. Patronus also goes after securing large language models. And a few latecomers to the news. We have some news about a failed SentinelOne acquisition by Cisco and a potentially successful acquisition of Splunk by Cisco. All that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly.
If your organization is ready to embrace edge computing, we have good news. The 2023 AT&T Cybersecurity Insights Report provides everything you need to know to get started. In the report, we identify the common characteristics of edge computing. We found edge use cases are rapidly coming online, and we reveal how to secure edge computing. Most importantly, you'll learn how to prepare for your edge ecosystem. Get your complimentary copy of the report today. Visit securityweekly.com/ATT cybersecurity. That's securityweekly.com/ATT cybersecurity. The cybersecurity landscape is full of single solution providers, making it easy for unexpected cyber threats to sneak through the cracks. That's why Forrester is creating a stronger, simpler strategy for protection, one that increases your security maturity while decreasing the operational burden that comes with it. This is all possible thanks to Forrester's best-in-class portfolio and deep bench of expert problem solvers. Forrester's integrated, scalable solutions help customers face their toughest challenges with confidence. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Fortra, Fortra. Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly and happy National Pawpaw Day. No, that is not your granddad. It's a fruit. This is episode 332, recorded on Thursday, 21st, 2023. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria, and joining me today is the Master of Mobile, the Professor of Privileged Activity, Mr. Lee Neely. How are you doing?
Wow,
How are you, Lee?
It is wonderful to be here. It's a great change my day. It's just already lowering my stress level about 10 points. So I am looking forward to a great talk with Merritt and see what Forrester Research has been talking about.
So you were prescribed doing this podcast for your blood pressure is what I'm hearing.
Pretty much. Thank you.
Very nice. Self prescribed.
Yes.
All right, and yeah, those are. If you haven't heard of a pawpaw, look it up. It's like a green kind of oblong, kind of looks like a squished oval lime in some ways. And they're common in Tennessee, and people either love them because they use them for something, or they hate them because they twist their ankle on them when they go to mow the lawn. Interesting fruit. As a member, so quick announcement here, as a member of the Security Weekly community, we are pleased to offer you 50% off your AIDC 2023 tickets using code CRA50OFF. That's CRA50OFF. Join us on October 4th, 2023 in Pentagon City. ICIT, the nation's #1 cybersecurity think tank, brings together America's leading minds to discuss AI's impact on the country. Register today at securityweekly.com/AIDC 2023. That sounds very interesting. That's I'm going to have to look those up later. I'm not familiar with those organizations. Yeah, a lot of interesting AI talk going on right now. But the talk we have going on today is with Forrester's 2024 Security Planning Report and one of its key authors, Merritt Maxim. Merritt is a VP and research director at Forrester and leads a team of analysts who cover IAM, endpoint, threat intel, and vulnerability management. Welcome, Merritt.
Hi, Adrian. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Pleasure to have you here. Right. So yeah, maybe give us a little background on this report. How long have you been doing this report, and what gets you excited about it?
Yeah, sure. So this is the second year we've done this report. We do this across research. We don't just do it for security research. We do it for all of our major disciplines at Forrester. And this idea for this report came out of direct client feedback, where particularly for those whose fiscal year is the calendar year, the summer is usually when they start to do their capital budgeting for the following fiscal year. And we heard increasingly kind of feedback from them that they'd like more guidance about what are kind of the emerging technologies that are worth, investing some in the coming year, which are ones that are maybe not as valuable anymore that they could divest from and so forth. So the planning guide came to existence last year in its inaugural year as a way to help security people weed through all the various technologies and vendors that are out there to try to give our collective assessment across the entire Forrester Security and Risk Analyst team to kind of highlight what are the technologies that we see that we're bullish on, what are the ones that we're bearish on, and which are the ones that we're kind of sitting on the fence on. And the idea behind this report is to give those security and risk people guidance on that. And again, this will now be an annual report that we will continue to produce given the positive feedback we got last year. So we did it again this year, and we'll continue to do so going forward.
Yeah. Very good stuff. I'm a big fan of high level, kind of holistic approaches to understanding security. And, oftentimes it's easy to get stuck down rabbit holes or distracted by things. We're just talking about AI, a lot of hype going on with that. But to bring it all back, to bring all the fundamentals together and kind of discuss what's going on there, like some people might not see that as exciting, but that's, I think that's really where you're most likely to move the needle on things. Now I read off a list of what your folks cover with you as a research director. Is this report limited to that, or does it go beyond IAM, endpoint, the other technologies that I mentioned?
Yeah, it's a good question. It goes across my colleagues as well. So it's not just my team, but it's the other team. So it would include things like GRC technologies, other things that may be more on the risk side, as well as all the traditional network security or zero trust type tools, which is managed by another colleague of mine. But so this reflects not just my teams, but as I said, the entire Forrester research analyst community globally, which is about 25 analysts globally. And essentially we get together, early in July, and we kind of brainstorm and kind of come up with this list. And then that ultimately is what gets published in the report earlier in August.
Yeah. Yeah, and we talked
so
about...
it represents the full kind of spectrum of security technologies, and the ones that we say we're bullish on and bearish on, that we're essentially giving hopefully a holistic view of all the possible technologies that are kind of within the purview of a traditional CISO at a organization today.
Right. Yeah, so the Wall Street Journal had an article the other day titled "Cybersecurity Budgets Aren't Untouchable," and that's actually one of the first topics that you tackle here in the report, talking about how spending is trending. So, can we talk about that a little bit about budgeting? I think traditionally security has gotten pretty much everything that they've asked for. Maybe not in every case, but if you were to average across the industry, security budgets have been growing for a long time. What are you seeing now with the market downturn that we saw last year? We've seen a lot of tech companies and even non-tech companies doing layoffs, and even security companies doing layoffs. What are you seeing in terms of budgets and spending?
Yeah, so I should state, as part of the planning guide exercise, we actually do field data from security decision makers on kind of their overall trends and themes around spending, not necessarily in the individual technologies, but more around, say, security services, security staffing, cloud security, on-prem security, et cetera. And so we have that information also in planning guide, and that does show some areas where Essentially, I'd say we see some areas where there's some flat spending. For instance, like security awareness and training, that came across as basically no one's planning to, very few people are planning to increase it. It's going to essentially stay flat. Whereas things like cloud are showing a slightly higher uptick, and even things like staffing, we saw some decreases in staffing projected spending, and some of that is more a function of the kind of tight labor market than it are. So it's more the reality of the situation than it is companies are saying that they don't need more staffing. It's just the reality that their ability to find, recruit, and retain staffing is harder. So therefore, they're maybe pulling back on that and either putting that money into, say, services or into somewhere else. So the overall security budget is still growing, but there are certain pockets that you'll see higher growth or lower growth based on kind of a typical CISO's perspective about the relative value of that technology itself.
I had a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Lee.
So I was, you're talking about the growth, and I'm just wondering, because we keep coming back to this, is the what do we want to call it? The talent gap, the ability to hire, pumping the brakes here, or is it really things are rolling forward anyway? Is it a big factor?
It is a factor. In our data, again, this was U.S. security decision makers only. 7% of them said they plan to decrease security staffing spending in the next 12 months. But some of those also showed a greater increase in spending on services. So some of it may just be they're still looking to have these services delivered, but they may be making the choice to have them delivered by a services partner as opposed to trying to do it internally purely from a staffing or other thing like that. So the staffing issue is definitely at play here, but I think there are workarounds, and that's no longer purely an excuse to say we can't find someone, so therefore we have to delay this project. I mean, there are ways to cross-train or recruit other people outside security that may have skill sets to actually help run and operate these things. And so it's not, the lack of staffing in and of itself shouldn't be the sole reason for why you choose not to deploy or manage a certain security technology in your organization.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, and so I'm kind of getting a sense here, a sense of a question at least. Are organizations starting to kind of separate winners and losers? Like we've seen some academic research showing that security awareness, at least certain types of security awareness training, could actually be more harmful than helpful. But in general, it sounds like some of this funding is moving around, maybe because folks are seeing, and I guess this is part of the question. Is it moving around because they're seeing more value from some product categories than others? Or is it more that, they're just trying to diversify? They don't actually know what's working better with others. They're just trying new things as they kind of keep the old things going, but aren't spending more on them.
Yeah, I think some of it is that they're with the budgets getting tighter in this economic environment. There is, I think, greater scrutiny on security spending than there was a couple of years ago, where it was kind of the wild, wild west. And with the kind of hybrid or remote work, or organizations really had to scramble and to do stuff, and so they spent money fairly aggressively. I think now you're seeing with the pullback in budgets, and certainly we've seen plenty of companies that have had layoffs or reductions in employment this year. Companies are saying, not necessarily saying that, I don't want to use the security technology. They're trying to quantify the value that they're getting out of security technology. And if the value of that investment is not up to a level, maybe they're going to decrease investment and apply that money somewhere else where they're going to be able to get a greater return. Now, it's often hard to, calculate the ROI of a given security technology, since a lot of it is really about preventing an attack. But I certainly see there is a greater scrutiny, not just from the CISOs, but from the CISO's boss, and even at the board level now, to really understand the cybersecurity spending and try and take a close look at it. And if there are some certain things like say training, for example, that maybe aren't generating the kind of value that you expected, maybe that money is going to now be, it's not necessarily going to be pulled back completely, but maybe you now look to reallocate that money somewhere else where maybe you can get a better return and get a better line of defense in your organization in the process.
And one of the things we've seen here is just a massive outsourcing, right? Like we've seen, in fact, we cover the market a lot. We look at funding and acquisitions, and the amount of funding and acquisitions we see, like small MSSPs getting consolidated and MDR firms popping up, it is just, I would say, probably 80% of the deals that we see are just these services. And it seems more and more people are outsourcing these, but I'm not sure I'm seeing a whole lot of again, to talk about the actual efficacy, and the value along with these, certainly it saves you having to hire talent, and it saves you having to deal with learning curves and implementation and all those headaches. But what kind of trends are you seeing in terms of managed services and people moving stuff in and out of, managing it directly within the organization?
I think the kind of managed services certainly play are still a big part of the cybersecurity ecosystem. I think the kind of company's tolerance or appetite, if you will, for managed services is somewhat a function of a couple things. One could be the size. Smaller companies may have smaller staffing, and therefore their ability to kind of build an organic team to do all this may be more limited, and therefore services may be a better option. It could also be a geographic. If you're operating in an area that maybe there's not a deep pool of kind of technical talent available for you to hire yourself, that you have to rely on a service provider as well. So I think that's some of what's driving that. That doesn't mean that large companies don't still avail themselves of using MSSPs, but I think some of those characteristics that I described play a role, and that's why you see some of that consolidation at the lower end, as some of these MSSPs try to go after that kind of mid segment. Companies in like the 2,000 to 5,000 employee range that are still large, multi-$100 million companies, but just may not have a huge IT staff that they can manage to do all this themselves.
And another question I had around this was I think when cloud first came out and we started to see SaaS applications, there were a lot of predictions of organizations getting rid of their data centers, getting rid of their on-prem stuff. But as we've seen recently, like there's been massive impact of companies who sell basically FTP software getting compromised, and in the news, seeing that stuff get compromised, we can clearly see that didn't happen. There's still a lot of in-house gear and stuff like that security teams have to worry about and IT teams have to manage and take care of. What have you seen? What's the kind of thinking around there? How do security teams prioritize, or how are you recommending that they prioritize with regards to workloads in the cloud and SaaS applications versus things that the legacy stuff they still have on-prem? And is it fair to call that stuff still legacy? Do we still see that stuff disappearing, or is it look like it's just going to stay there forever?
Yeah, I think we're stuck with the term legacy, whether we like it or not. I think the operative word for the modern enterprise today is hybrid. Certainly the growth and the push is to do more and more things in the cloud, but there may be certain systems or applications for which there is not an equivalent alternative that operates in the cloud. Maybe an on-prem, order management or fulfillment system that's been used by organizations for decades. It runs on, say, a mainframe or some other system like that. It works, it's scalable, and that there isn't necessarily an easy business case made for why that goes to the cloud. And we see this in our client interactions all the time, where there's definitely interest and high demand for cloud-based systems, but there's also a growing realization that there are some systems that may just never be suitable for the cloud, which means companies are going to be in this hybrid model, which is why even in our data for this planning guide, we do still show that there is still spending going to maintaining on-prem security technologies. It may not be increasing necessarily, but they're not completely pulling the plug on that stuff. And so I think that hybrid model is been here for a while, and it's going to persist. Some companies will be more aggressive at trying to get as much in the cloud as possible, but even those scenarios, there's always going to be certain applications that just may not be suitable for the cloud, and there'll be this kind of hybrid mode that organizations will have to manage around for the foreseeable future.
So, as I was skimming through the report, which I'm thinking of. I already was thinking of who I would share it with when I'm going through it. By the way, thank you. I got the impression that there was a certain amount of activity. What I was characterizing, no offense to anybody, as cleanup. There was a lot of rapid adoption done in the last year, but we didn't retire the old or fully get out of or do everything we were supposed to, putting in the security measures, turning off old services, all those sorts of things. Is that a correct assumption, or is that am I reading too much into there?
No, I think there's some aspect of that, and certainly in the plan guide, we do call out, third-party risk management as a growth area. And again, Adrian mentioned some of those kind of FTP type related breaches. I mean that's essentially a third-party issue now that organizations unfortunately have had to be made aware of because of breaches, and so that is, I think, open your eyes that they do need a full assessment of their assets, of their APIs, what they're connecting with, how vulnerable all those systems. And it used to be that you would, send out some kind of a, supplier checklist, if you will, once a year. That was kind of manual. We're seeing growing interest in try how you automate that, because companies do realize, they need to integrate and interact with other third parties as part of being operating in the 21st century. But in so doing, they do expose themselves to some risk. So how do we mitigate that? And that's where these third party risk management tools come into play to kind of helping mitigate that. And I think that's very much going to be a reality for most CISOs going forward, is to understand where all these systems are, what they're connecting to, and making sure that you're not unnecessarily exposed by some API that was created 10 years ago that people forgot about, that is actually still exposed to the internet and could be compromised by hackers.
Actually, yeah, those old legacy in a different context, things from we did in the past that we solved problems. I can think about how many times I did them past, and I hope none of them are still around. But I'm hoping a modern CISO is looking. So you also mentioned AI in quite a few places, and where I come from, we're working on guidance for how to use it right and what to do with it, as well as investigating. Are the folks looking at adoption? Are they looking at guidance, or is it something else? I mean, it's all the buzzwords everywhere.
Yeah, no, it's definitely everywhere, and we see it a lot. And right from a security risk standpoint, there we have there's multiple angles on which AI plays a role. One is in the creation of AI bots or other things that can actually promulgate either social engineering attacks or other things like that, using data to make phishing emails that appear very realistic. So one is how I defend against, because essentially AI used for evil, and the flip side of that is AI used for good. So I use AI to look for anomalous activity in my network to identify attackers kind of before they can do things. So it's really those two kind of forks. I think, unfortunately, AI being used for evil is probably going to be mature faster than AI for good is. But that vendors are actively trying to address that. So I think that's where we're at today. And it also means the security. If you're using, say, training data, making sure that the data integrity becomes a big part of this, right? So how do I ensure that the training data I'm using in my AI system hasn't been compromised or hasn't been somehow manipulated, so it generates a faulty output that may then lead to a different decision and therefore creates more risk or vulnerability. So unfortunately, we're really still in the early stages of understanding how AI can kind of wreak havoc here, but it's definitely going to be, it is on there. If it's not already, should be on the radar of every CISO globally today, and understanding how to defend against it, but then also how it could actually be leveraged to help better improve detection, prevention, and things like that.
Yeah, that's what I was hoping you'd say something like that, because I think it's intriguing, even though wherever we are on the maturity, I don't think ignoring it is the right answer. It definitely seems like
Correct.
It's good. So
yeah, for instance, one of the things we highlight in the report, that again, this is one example of how AI can be used for good, is this concept of AI generated synthetic data. So, and the idea here is that you use AI to essentially create data that looks like real customer data, but it's actually not. But the point is, it now allows your marketing teams or other people to actually work with data in ways that doesn't put them in the crosshairs of privacy regulators, things like that. Because previously you might have to have relied on production or actual real customer data to do some of this testing. And with the AI, you can now generate synthetic data that avoids that issue. And there's a lot of opportunity for, say, security and marketing teams to now work together to do that, to, as I said, minimize kind of privacy uses or abuses of actual real customer data. So that's one example we call out that is an example of AI being used for good.
Yeah. Oh, I think these are exciting times. I little personal background. When I was in college, I tried to write a natural language parser as a senior project, and I made some bonehead programming mistakes, but it was hard. And I look at what's out there now; it's like, holy mackerel! They really come a long way. And I'm hoping we can really leverage the engines behind it to increase our capabilities. I wanted to switch topics a little bit. One of the bullets in your report talks about consent management, and just the other day I was looking at how in California they're passing will pass a right to delete for data brokers. I was wondering, it looks like people really are paying attention to privacy requirements and all that stuff, even if they are confusing. Is that a good consensus, or are people really waking up to all of that?
I think they are. And again, some of that was driven initially by GDPR, but we now are seeing the emergence of, in the U.S., certain state-specific privacy regulations. You mentioned one in California. I'm aware of several other states. I think Washington State has one in discussion. Massachusetts, there's a bunch of them. So that is now, I think, pushing
the person you are trying to reach is currently unavailable.
May not have had to worry about GDPR, now paying attention to that. So, and I think they're aware because of the fines and things that can come about because of GDPR and privacy regulations. Consent management is something that they're paying more attention to. And fortunately, there are a range of providers that exist to help companies kind of better manage that and get a handle on that to ensure that their users are, in fact, following the proper regulations when it comes to consent management in terms of how data is going to be used or shared.
That's good news. I'm sure it's confusing as all get out if you haven't been paying attention to it. But the GDPR was, I remember when GDPR came, we first started looking at it and whether it applied to our area. And then when the California Privacy Act came out, it was very similar until our lawyers pointed out the difference. Is the average CISO smart enough to hire a lawyer to help figure this stuff out, or are they trying to go for it on their own?
It's a good question. I think part of the challenge with things like consent management is this is one area that may or may not be within the purview of the CISO. It may actually be under the purview of the chief privacy officer, chief legal counsel, and possibly even someone outside of IT, depending on the organization. So, they may be the ones who actually drive their kind of procurement and evaluation and deployment of that solution. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It just means that as a CISO, you may have less involvement with the consent management than you do with other technologies. So I think that's depending on kind of where the organization is. If they handle customer data and interact with customer data, that they're aware that this is something they need to pay attention to. And I would say if CISOs are being asked to do that, that's fine. But I would encourage them, if they have someone who manages privacy or other things in the organization, to integrate and collaborate with those individuals, because they can play a really important role in making sure that your approach to consent management isn't running afoul of any regulations or other business requirements that you may have.
Yeah. Well, I really agree with your comment there. I mean, we were looking at some of the changes, and I had picked up some of them, and then my general counsel said, "Oh, but did you see these 7 things that we need to worry about?" I'm not a lawyer. I don't play one on TV, and I am very fortunate to have a legal team to support me. And it wasn't just them, by the way. Other organizations get involved too, as you said. It's not just an IT thing. We have to work together on that one, because the consequence of getting it wrong. So Zero Trust shows up in your report. I'm on the fence on Zero Trust. Some parts of it I absolutely love. Some parts I just plug my nose. What's the general sense on Zero Trust out there? I mean, I agree the moat and castle thing is outdated. But is it making traction? Is it going to make a difference?
So, I would agree with you that there continues to be, philosophical questions about people who like zero trust or not. We certainly see a lot of vendor interest in it. I'd say some customers continue to be confused by zero trust in the sense, we have to tell them zero trust isn't really a product or something you deploy. It's a solution. It's an architecture. It's a way you go about security. And in a lot of organizations, that's actually that can be quite a significant organizational shift. Certainly, I think the U.S. federal sector is one, again, partially because of the Biden administration has pushed out a bunch of executive orders around zero trust. That's really where I'd say there's the most kind of interest and demand right now, and there's actually a lot of funding behind it. And so I think that's certainly one area where there's a lot of interest in zero trust. And as with anything with the federal government, anytime they're doing something, there's always that spillover effect that they may start to influence private industry as well, because private industry, when they interact with the government, they may have to, do certain things that prove they're meeting kind of zero trust tenets. So I think that's, if I was to kind of say where is zero trust really growing the most, I think the federal sector is where we see a lot of growth and opportunity, but it still has relevance for private enterprises as well. But it is also something that is not achievable overnight. It requires, a lot of effort. And in many cases, you may already be doing zero trust things without even realizing it. If you're doing, two-factor authentication or privileged identity management, I mean, those are zero trust principles behind those products. So you may already be, leveraging some zero trust principles without even realizing it. So I think that's kind of where we're at today. But there's definitely a lot of growth and opportunity there. And vendors are eagerly, I think, evolving their solutions to help address some of those specific use cases around zero trust.
Yeah, I agree with you. Like I said, there's some exciting stuff there, and it has the potential to make the way we do security easier, because some of the stuff that we work so hard to shut down will be shut pre-connection, decided it doesn't work. With all the cloud adoption, I'm obviously in the federal space. You probably derived that by now, and I have the luxury of using FedRAMP solutions, which makes security a lot easier in terms of figuring out how to control it. How is the private sector doing in that space with securing all these apps and stuff? Are they reliant on various posture assessment and cloud, or are they able to get their arms around the controls to secure their cloud services? I mean, what's it like in the real world?
Yeah, in the private sector, I think, given that we continue to see breaches revolving around cloud services, suggests that it is still an ongoing challenge. And it usually it's related to a configuration, a permission was given that should have been given, or a storage bucket was left open when it should have been. And that's why you do see, what we really just call the SPM, the security posture management solutions that are emerging, whether it's, and there's a bunch of acronyms at play here. There's cloud security posture management.
DSPM,
correct.
SSPM.
And I think those are all going to ultimately be converged, either acquired by larger cloud providers, but they do provide a lot of value by helping scan your system, looking for those config changes, looking for permissions or entitlement drift, and helping to improve those. So there is a lot of interest and value there. But that market is going to kind of converge around a kind of single posture management solution that kind of does all the things that the CSPM, DSPM, CIM do today, but that's still going to take a few years.
Mm-hmm.
So there is one interesting challenge there that I'm curious of your opinion on. With a lot of SaaS services, there are, I think this is one of the first times that we see IT doesn't own software, right? Like if your HR uses a SaaS system, something like Bamboo or something like that, maybe IT isn't even involved in that decision. You might see some departments going out, they decide they need Figma or they need Canva, on the design and marketing side of things. Do you see that being a considerable challenge for security teams, even figuring out who owns these things, who these admins are? Well, I imagine it's somewhat an IT challenge as well, since they might want to pull that stuff back in, or do they not? Do they just let these departments own their own stuff?
No, there's a different challenge there, and we first initially we had shadow IT, which was individual users just going to Dropbox or wherever and just putting files in there that they shouldn't be in. So that's where you had solutions like cloud security gateways that would then go out and identify usage of shadow IT. Now we have kind of department shadow IT, like you said, where HR decides that they want to use a cloud-based system, and IT may be involved in the procurement and maybe even a certain extent on the deployment, but IT may have very little input on the evaluation and assessment. In other words, if there are certain security features that IT is looking for, they may have some ability to influence that, but they're not just driving that discussion. And in many cases, if the purchase goes ahead, now IT is forced to kind of figure out how to mitigate those risks. So, but I do think organizations are getting smarter about that. They are more security aware that these are issues, and so I wouldn't say they're doing these things blindly without concern for what security implications are before they make a deployment purchase. But there is very much a need for the CISO to be visible and to interact across the organization, to be aware of these initiatives. So if in fact there is something that's going out for tender RFP, they have some input over things to make sure that security considerations are being part of the evaluation.
And all this stuff, everything's got an API now, right? So is that kind of the key behind all these posture management tools and pulling all this stuff together, at least from a visibility standpoint? So it's kind of like the first half of my question. Then the second half of my question is also with APIs, you can control things. So that is that kind of the answer? If my organization has 1,000 SaaS apps, is the only way, or I'm using 3 different public clouds. Is the only way that you manage all that stuff with some kind of posture management tool that connects to everything through API and manages policies and guardrails and stuff like that through an API.
Yeah, I think the key thing you mentioned is the multiple cloud providers. I mean, I mentioned hybrid is the kind of operative word for IT. The other operative word is multi-cloud. Most companies are in fact using multiple cloud providers, and that's part of the reason why these posture management solutions exist, because while there may be very good configuration management within an individual cloud provider's offering, they're not as strong at evaluating competing cloud configuration systems. So that's why these kind of independent offerings help do that by applying the same kind of search and assessment across different cloud providers to make sure that even if you're committed to say you're primarily using AWS, but using Azure for some things, and to make sure that the configurations are consistent across the board. And that's part of the reason why these posture management solutions exist, is that companies need essentially consistency across the clouds that they're using. And these posture management solutions help them realize that in ways that they can't necessarily get natively from the cloud providers themselves.
Yeah, and another trend that I've noticed, you already mentioned what I've seen referred to as privacy engineering. You were talking about AI generating data that functions and looks like customer data, but it's not actually customer data. So it's not a big deal if it gets compromised or something like that. It makes it a little bit easier to hand it off to developers and engineers and let them use it. Also in the report, you mentioned consent management. I've also seen a ton of startups around identity verification. And as the host of a podcast that focuses a lot on the market, I've had the challenge of thinking, like, is this stuff really cybersecurity? Should we be covering this? Is it security teams that are heading this kind of stuff up, or does it also branch into legal and some other departments as well?
It definitely branches. Certainly, if you're a large customer-facing organization, you probably have a chief privacy officer, and so the things like consent management and stuff like that are often within the purview of that individual. But that individual, usually or should be working closely with the CISO to make sure that they are on board on things. There are obviously often legal requirements or issues at play here that maybe the CISO is not as well aware of, but which the privacy officer or like chief counsel can help with. So it does, I think, reflect the increasing scope of the CISO, but some of the privacy stuff may not fully be kind of within the full responsibility. The CISO may not be within their budget, and so, but since that data can in fact still represent a risk, the CISO needs to be involved in managing and being on top of that.
Yeah, and so as we're kind of winding down on time here, yeah, Lee, I want to let you ask that question. Yeah, go ahead, Lee.
So as I was looking through this and all the stuff, I was thinking, when you were putting all of this report together, were there any surprises of like, this wasn't covered, or holy crap, they're looking at this kind of thing? Any, like I said, anything that caught you off guard?
I think anything that caught us off guard. I mean, I do think one of the areas that I'd say are bearish on would be kind of on-prem appliances, whether they are secure web gateways, IPS secure email gateways, and some of that is for the fact that there have been some 0 days against some of those types of appliances this year. In some cases, they don't even enable. There really is no easy fix, and so that I think to us was a further evidence that some of these on-prem hardware appliances may not be suitable, and that you may be able to get equivalent capabilities in a broader networking play that may be cloud host or something like that to avoid that. So that's I wouldn't necessarily say it was surprising, but it was consistent with kind of what we had seen, given the some of the 0 days that have been announced against a bunch of the standalone hardware appliances in this year.
Yeah, Move It comes to mind among others. Go ahead.
What was that, Lee? I missed that.
I was going to say, when you mentioned hardware appliance, I thought about the Move It breach and the Barracuda email gateway.
Yeah, and that's in here too. This report wastes no time or space. It's very efficient in hitting pretty much everything I'd want to ask about, and I'm not going to have a chance to ask everything about it. So, folks who are listening to this are just going to have to go check out the report for the rest. Merritt, this has been really interesting and thought-provoking, and I love how much ground we're able to cover here. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Enjoyed it.
All right, stay tuned. When we come back, we're going to talk tabletop exercises with Ryan Freed from Mandiant. Cyber threats target digital identities. Do you know who or what is accessing your company's apps, systems, and data? You need to know who's there, who to let in, and who to keep out. And you'll need more than access management to stay secure. You need SailPoint Identity Security. As the leader in identity security, SailPoint can help mature your security resilience while driving efficiencies and compliance for your organization. Start your identity journey with SailPoint's free maturity assessment. Go to securityweekly.com/SailPoint to get your free identity security assessment today. Are you constantly thinking about how to keep your enterprise as secure as possible? Get to know Chrome Enterprise, the trusted browser for security-conscious professionals like you. Its ease of use for IT and security teams and added access controls protect the remote, extended, and hybrid workforce, keeping your entire enterprise safe. Don't settle for a browser that compromises your organization. Visit securityweekly.com/Chrome Enterprise now to learn more and start protecting your enterprise like never before. Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. Security Weekly listeners, InfoSec World 2023 is just weeks away. Have you registered to join over 2,500 cybersecurity experts on September 25th through 27th in Lake Buena Vista, Florida? InfoSec World is your gateway to a world of knowledge and growth. Don't miss the chance to enhance your career, connect with industry leaders, and make an impact on the rapidly evolving landscape. Secure your seat using code ISW23-SecWeek20 to save 20% off your registration. Register today at securityweekly.com/InfoSecWorld2023. And that is next week. That is really close. So if you're in the area, it's a great conference to go check out. There's going to be a lot of good talks, and hope there's a good turnout. Also, I think we're going to have some interviews coming from there that we will air on this show in the weeks to come. All right, for this interview, Ryan Freed from Mandiant joins us once again today to talk about tabletop exercises. Ryan has made several appearances on the show, initially as a practitioner at Brooks and most recently in his new role at Mandiant. Welcome to the show, Ryan.
Thanks. Happy to be back.
Yeah, and one of my favorite topics here, and for Ryan, he's going to be hearing me say this for the second time, but the reason this is one of my favorite topics is I do a lot of analysis on what goes wrong in cybersecurity, why breaches happen, why there are failures, and a lot of it seems to come down to people and process. In a lot of cases, you see people had exactly what they needed to prevent, a bad outcome. They had the people they needed, but those people didn't know what they were doing with those tools, or the tools weren't correctly configured, or they weren't fully implemented. There's always just these little pieces missing. Maybe they're aware of it. They never finished a project. In some cases, they thought they finished a project. I recall one case in particular where an EDR tool was rolled out to thousands, I think 8,000 endpoints, but nobody pushed a policy to it. They didn't realize they had missed a step there. So they literally just had to push one more button and they would have been done. So how do you discover that kind of stuff? How do you realize when you're missing some of this critical process stuff? So Ryan, this is why I get so excited about this topic, and I'm glad we're talking about tabletops today.
Yeah, I'm sure many of us have a story, specifically within the last 3 months, we went through an incident and we found out our VPN logs weren't being sent to our SIM because some password was changed or it was moved to a different syslog broker, and we just didn't have them. And that's something that, if we were practicing more often in different scenarios, we would have found out earlier on. So yeah, I feel your story is like that.
Yeah, I have a much older story, but they were doing battery maintenance in the data center, which required all the racks to lose power, everything to be cleanly powered off. And most of the systems in the racks would automatically switch back on and boot up just when you restored power to them. But some of them required someone to go push a button with a finger. And our SIM was one of those products. Oh. And 3 weeks later, when we had an incident, we found out our SIMs were still off from that battery maintenance in the data center. and we realized we needed some kind of uptime monitor, some kind of quality monitoring on our SIM.
Yeah, it's funny. I feel like, I used to purchase products on the practitioner side. Almost always they'll ask why you're looking at this product, and it seems like it's either compliance or a recent incident. You don't want to have the same situation twice, and you want to fill in those gaps. So, as a vendor, that's the right time to engage with other people because it's fresh in their mind. And like I said, you don't want to go through that twice if you can avoid it.
Tabletops are kind of like pen tests, right? Like when you say that word, there's either very specific things that enter people's minds because they're picturing what they've experienced personally, or they have a lot more experience and they realize like there are really, really bad ones and there's really, really good ones, and there's a lot of space in between. So what are we talking about when we say tabletops here? Maybe give us a bit of a some idea of the different kinds of tabletops and the breadth of the types of tabletops that you're doing.
Yeah, I think it's really a journey. Initially starting off, it's important to separate a technical tabletop exercise from an executive tabletop. Very different objectives, very different audience. So for a technical tabletop, you might have a scenario, maybe you have an externally facing server, it's compromised, has a connection into your network, ransomware happens, what do you do? Who needs to know what and when? And what are your technical controls to isolate? If you have to rely on the network team to isolate, do you have an on-call person if it's after hours? All those really low-level details from a technical perspective. So by the end, you hopefully want to feel good about having really good documented procedures for those types of situations. And ransomware is one example. There are many others, but that's typically what we see. And then from an executive tabletop, taking that really tactical information and communicating that from most likely the incident commander, figuring out really the first question is who can declare an incident and who becomes the commander. And then for the executives, like I said, who needs to know what, how often, do they have to report to the board? If this affects customers, making sure information doesn't leak, who's responsible for contacting or interfacing with the media, shareholders, all those kind of situations. So that's usually the first level. And then, we talked about previously, you might actually run a scenario. You kind of combine it with a red team assessment where you actually have ransomware in a sandbox or isolated part of your environment and, proving those controls of isolating it, wiping it, collecting forensic images, those kind of stuff.
So how many assumptions do you have to make here versus you're actually trying to do some real things here? Like one of the surprises that I've heard, certainly I think the number one surprise I've heard, people coming out of incidents, especially ransomware incidents, is not knowing who to talk to for different things. Like who decides if we pay the ransom or not, and who can tell me whether or not I can shut off this machine or not, tends to be a big one. But then there's other ones I've heard where third parties come into play where, okay, if we're planning on using filing an insurance claim with our cybersecurity policy on this, all of a sudden the decision of whether to pay or not is no longer in our hands. Like the insurance company now gets to make that choice. Are you discovering those kinds of things in these tabletops, or do you have to make some assumptions? Like maybe you don't even know if they have cybersecurity insurance when you're coming in and doing this.
Yeah, obviously we try to get that information up front, but there are a lot of assumptions that we try to uncover. So for instance, a lot of companies have a retainer with us for incident response, and we'll help contain ransomware, try to kick the threat actor out of the environment. But we're not going to do ransomware negotiation. We're not going to talk to the threat actor, and we're not going to try decryption. And the customer needs to know that up front. We also see a lot of the time the interface with outside counsel and how that's done, because typically legal or outside counsel might actually engage with the insurance company or the retainer so you can maintain that attorney-client privilege. So there is a lot of complexity when you start to think about insurance, outside counsel, all your different partners. Maybe you work with an MSSP for your EDR or different things. So we try to,
Right.
Look at all those complexities and understand who's authorized to contact. And I'd argue just as important, what's the severity level that you're engaging your IR retainer? Is it a medium or critical or high? What defines high or critical? Whether it's a certain amount of systems or customer facing, it's really helpful to have that stuff defined so there's no question, when to engage these different third parties.
Right. Like one of the horror stories I've heard is, we were having an incident and we called our MSSP and asked for the data for this system for, the previous 24 hours. And the response was, "Oh, you don't pay for that level of service. We can't give that data to you." Which to me, like,
Hello. So actually, I was thinking about a different scenario I've run into where there is a defined emergency operations center, but their focus isn't on IT. It's on the facility and the business. And, IT needs to have a seat at the table when they're doing their tabletops. And even discovering that the IT folks weren't on the allowed folks to get back in before the general populace was allowed in, which seems like a dumb moment, but that's a communication breakdown. Have you run into things like that, or am I very unique there?
No, I can see what you mean. Sometimes we'll see the crisis management team. Cybersecurity is just one part of it. There will be physical security type incidents, operational type. And I think people sometimes forget about that cybersecurity is just one reason. I mean, think about COVID and the pandemic. That was another emergency response and crisis communication type situation that companies had to deal with. So the process should be really similar. It's just different situations that you run into.
I was going to say, any advice for our average CISO to make sure they don't wind up without a seat at the table?
Yeah, I mean, having those communications early, I think starting with like your chief legal officer is usually a good place if, since legal is typically involved, maybe your COO, but yeah, engaging, if you have a chief risk officer, it's funny because I feel like there should be more tabletop exercises outside of cyber, but in my experience, whether it's part of compliance or just because of the threat landscape out there right now, I find a lot of the time that cybersecurity or the CISO are running these types of exercises. So then when you get that crisis management team in their heads, they're thinking, well, maybe this would be a good idea to plan for other types of situations, like operational outages.
Mm-hmm. Well,
disaster recovery, right?
Yeah.
BCP, yeah. Yeah, so it sounded like you gave out some examples of as we've been talking about this, you've been throwing out examples of mostly the executive side of the tabletops, right? Like we've been talking about crisis communications and getting in touch with legal, whereas I imagine the technical tabletops, the discussion is more around, will you be able to, can you detect these lateral movement efforts? Are you prepared to, detect all these TTPs that are typical of an attacker coming in and installing malware? Now, on the technical side, are those usually pretty scenario specific, and are they all ransomware these days?
A lot of them are. Yeah. I mean, you start with one situation and then the injects, when you give more information that changes the scenario, we'll move this scenario along. But yeah, we might see, a data breach. Sometimes we'll see a third-party software that's compromised. So think about like SolarWinds or similar ones to that. So having the capability to remove software, But I think one really important thing that comes up in the technical exercises is the SOC team and who on the SOC team is authorized to isolate a system. I've seen from both ends of the spectrum where teams have in writing, which I think is really important from the CTO or the C-suite, that the security team has authorization in a crisis to contain a system, which might have critical business processes associated with it or domain controllers. But, once again, time is of the essence. I've seen other teams where they have the ability to isolate workstations and maybe low critical systems, assuming you have your systems labeled, but they actually have to get permission to isolate, medium or high, or basically any systems with business critical processes. And that's really important to know beforehand, because you don't want to be making these decisions without being informed about that.
Work goes into preparing for the tabletop, making sure that you have the right people in the room for that tabletop. Is there a lot of effort spent trying to figure out who those people are and making sure that they're going to be available when you do it?
Yeah, that is really important. If you don't have the right people at the table who are prepared, it's not going to be a very successful exercise. I think, a really interesting part of the technical ones is security, is the main focus, but inviting like service desk, your infrastructure team, your cloud team, it helps inform, why you're doing these or asking for these certain types of controls. Or most likely, if we need some forensics from the cloud or different endpoints, we might have to work with other teams and we want them to be ready, or, VMware virtualized environments. So it's important to bring those people who are actually doing the work. Having a manager is helpful, but having, a couple people, representatives from those different teams, I think is really important.
Do you find that people have really now understand the what BCDR really means, and it's not just go get the tapes and start doing restores, and are they keeping their plans up to date?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. It's interesting to see how BCDR, in my experience, typically falls under security, which it's a risk, and availability is part of the CIA triad, but it's not something I would necessarily automatically correlate with security. But I'm starting to see more and more of, so coming back to tabletop exercises, it's one thing to talk through, this system went down or we have to fail over to our DR environment, but it's really critical to actually do it. Like it doesn't need to be a business critical system, but actually failing over to your DR environment in that island, so there's not, IP address conflicts, taking that tape, actually restoring it, and then working with the business to get to the data that they need. So I'm starting to see that done more often as part of, ransomware preparedness, but really just best practice for disaster recovery, of going through the motions and recovering it to the point where the business process is available and the data is available.
Yeah. Yeah, I know from experience, if you don't know how to do that, it's really hard when the chips are down. But you made me think of it. I was in a DR session at a conference a number of years ago, and a young lady stood up in the back and said, "So when do I get to start kicking cables out of the wall?" How's that for frightening? Well intended.
Yeah, I remember. Yep, I remember a story I think I read about within the last couple of years. I think Netflix has a team where they literally just get to start pulling cables and ensuring they have the redundancy. So that's a whole
chaos
next
engineering.
level.
Yeah. They design software just to, that randomizes, simulates random bad things happening to their infrastructure. Just so they can make sure they can survive random bad things. Yeah, it's kind of terrifying, right?
Oh,
yep. Yeah, so if I can just add a couple other things, because I've been part of really bad tabletop exercises. I've planned them internally and now, providing them as a service for clients. I think a really big wealth of information is finding people who have been in IT for the last, 5 or 10 years at a company, because they've been part of incidents that maybe other people aren't as familiar with. And those incidents were handled a certain way. Maybe they were handled great, maybe not so much, but they're realistic because they actually happen. So I really love developing injects and situations based off of past incidents, just picking their brain for an hour of the kind of things that the war stories that they have. So I think that's usually super helpful, because there's no worse tabletop than, having an external person plan it and saying your internal Jira server was compromised, and then the client saying we use Jira Cloud, and you want them to play along with it, but you lose a lot of credibility that way. So there has to be a lot of work making sure it's truly believable.
It needs to feel authentic to them for them to take it seriously, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, and then even with Mandiant, we try to partner our threat intelligence, and we'll look at different threat actors that have targeted your industry in your country in the last 3 months, and we'll try to use those tactics and techniques of those threat actors and what they're targeting and incorporate that. So that's, maybe it hasn't happened to your company yet, but it's happened to companies, in your country, in your vertical. So that provides even more realistic scenarios. And then one other piece, just because I've gone through this before, you really need to make sure someone's taking notes. It's great to record things, but I've gone through 2-hour exercises where no one was taking notes and we didn't record it.
Oh, no.
So we had all these great lessons learned, but nobody wrote it down. So we were all jogging our memory, and we maybe captured half of what we talked about doing, but super important to have a note taker, so you can actually have deliverables out of that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's literally setting fire to cash right there. Come on, guys. Take some notes. Somebody pull out a notebook.
Yeah.
Well, particularly if you're paying for a pro from Dover to sit there and walk you through it, Jiminy Christmas, you want to record what's going on, don't you?
Right.
Definitely. We did that one internally, and that's just not something we thought to do. So lesson learned.
Yeah. So what are some of the things back when you pre-Mandiant, before you started doing this as a professional service? Are there things like, obviously having access to that threat intel that's hugely valuable to make the tabletop more relevant and realistic? But are there like head slapping type stuff like that you've learned going to Mandiant, doing tabletops there, that you wish you had known when you were just doing them yourselves and Googling how to do a tabletop? Or I don't know how most of us did tabletops back in the day, except ask other people and search online, right?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, pre-Mandiant, I would search the web. There's some pretty good resources out there. I think I forgot what government agency is. Maybe it's DHS or one of the other ones, but they actually provide some pretty good tabletop exercises. There's a couple that are cyber specific. That'll last you for a couple of years, but I typically just take the articles that I'm reading, and it's less important of what the specific scenario is, but it's the muscle memory of capturing forensics, having the right logs, maybe for a SaaS application, and those. So you can put hours and hours and hours into injects, and it's nice at Mandiant because we'll have a library of them, and we can do similar injects across different verticals. So that makes it a little bit easier there. But like you said, getting the right people is super important. And that's a little bit easier when you're within the company because you have that knowledge. But yeah, I think having templates here at Mandiant is definitely helpful. Otherwise, you're just doing it on your own, and you don't have a formal report if you're doing it internally. But it's still nice to have some kind of deliverable at the end.
Yeah. So I've mentioned in the past, sometimes thinking about security operations, particularly incident response, is like playing with a sports team where, if you do your incident response test once a year, like PCI DSS requires, you're probably not going to be any good when you get out on the field or on the court. But, you mentioned muscle memory. And if I've got you coming in doing tabletops maybe once a year, twice a year, I'm probably not going to get the muscle memory from that. So what's the lesson learned there? What's the general takeaway for them to get that muscle memory with DFIR tools and things like that? What's there's some kind of prescribed practice that comes out of doing the tabletops that, we need to use a breach and attack simulation tool, or like how are people getting that muscle memory?
Yeah, I'd offer two suggestions that I've done in the past at past companies. One, if you have a security staff meeting, a SOC meeting every week, use one of those maybe once a month. Get a scenario that you read about in the news and just talk through what you would do. How would you contain it? What logs would you need? Who would need to know what? So you can just, read different scenarios and talk through them. But the other one, which I think is just as impactful, is set a reminder or set up a meeting every 3 or 6 months and literally capture forensics for a machine. So you can do something for like a workstation, a server, and then something in the cloud, because tools change, processes change. So it's, super easy. It's really good for new people to the team because it increases their ability to do it. And it makes your documentation way better too, because you're updating every 3 months. So yeah, it's just setting, a recurring meeting. I think forensics is typically, one of the things that I'd recommend practicing, and just trying something different each time. Because in my experience, we had to rely on the server teams to pull RAM from VMs in VMware, and they didn't have a procedure to do it, and we were kind of scrambling during an incident. But if that's something we practice every 3 or 6 months, they would have documented procedures and it'd be pretty easy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was thinking that not just, and on the IT staff side, that they not only just know how to bring back the OS, but actually up the application stack. Don't just bring back the server for the financials, run a payroll, run a business process. That makes it more generic, right? And that's a lot harder. It has more dependencies.
Yeah, it's really involved. It takes a lot of people, it takes a lot of their time. It's really important, but as you do the business recovery procedures, or from a DR perspective, having like written instructions, hopefully printed out, of step by step of how you recover is important, not just to the OS level, like you're saying, but having detailed instructions to the application level and doing that for your critical applications. You don't have to figure it out on the fly.
Do you find there's any challenges getting sufficient management support for the activities? Not just, can I attend a meeting, but can I pay for some infrastructure to practice on, kind of things?
In my experience, no. Uptime has been really important for the companies I've been at. So I haven't seen a ton of pushback, from a BCDR or a cybersecurity like tabletop exercise. Mm-hmm. But a lot of that has come through audits. Like, it's not something they just thought about. It's not something they thought about one day, right? Compliance can be your friend. It's not something they just thought about. They were dinged on something, and all of a sudden now you can start engaging with vendors to help augment your BCDR or tabletop. So it's not something you might get right away, but now more than ever, I feel like from a tabletop perspective, the C-suite is as nervous about it, and they don't want to be unprepared if something happens.
I know that. Oh crap! We got a finding in an audit. I don't want that again. The other thing I was thinking about is to get real BCDR plans, as opposed to service recovery at the business level. That you not only need people that looking at not IT but business people, but also lead from the very top. Somebody has to say, this is a priority for our company. We will do it. Do people, I think what you asked earlier, people understand the difference, right? Between recovery IT and recover the business?
I think so. I mean, sometimes it takes, education, but yeah, I mean, disaster recovery from the technical side, having the recovery time objective of how long it takes to take a technical system, stand it back up. Maybe you have a backup system, a backup collaboration tool, backup, email, chat, or other business critical systems. But then business continuity is, can they actually do the process on that application?
Mm-hmm.
So taking it, one step further.
And I've noticed the business leadership has a completely different view on what's required to get their business done than cyber or IT does.
Yeah, one of the most fun, I've been involved with BCDR and previous companies is when you ask the business what their recovery time objective is, or recovery point objective of how much data they can live without. And in my experience, the RTO of having the system back online is usually very fast, an hour,
Mm-hmm.
2 hours, 4 hours. And then what I don't see in all companies is IT pushing back. Sometimes they just agree to it, but then, when the incident happens and all of a sudden they can't recover it in 4 hours, the business is pissed. You have this disconnect between the two. What you can do if you're, the tech side is like, great, you want 2 hours? Give me a, active data center that costs millions of dollars. And they're like, okay, 1 day is fine. Everyone's application is critical.
Yeah, and the language you push back with is the language of money, right? Like, okay, well, you want 1 hour? Here's what 1 hour costs.
Right.
Yeah. So I don't know where I lost you. I think I was in the middle of answering a question. I don't know how much you got, but our own podcast tabletops have served us well, and I've lost both power and internet twice so far during this episode. And I think the first one nobody noticed. I switched over to my phone. There was a big storm here where I'm at in Florida, but I am back to landline now, and the house internet versus my phone internet. And I was asking a question about how you know when somebody's ready for a tabletop, or maybe they're a bit too advanced for a tabletop, or does that even happen? Do you ever get so prepared that you don't really need the tabletops anymore, or do you always use them in conjunction with, maybe red teaming and stuff like that? But I kind of want to address both sides. Like, can you be so inexperienced that you're not ready for a tabletop yet? Let's start there.
I don't think so. I mean, as long as you're comfortable being uncomfortable and realizing you don't have a lot of the documentation, then I think there's a benefit for just about anybody. Especially if you have, you'd like to have at least some security presence to help drive it. If you have no security team, it might be a little bit more difficult. But once again, it doesn't need to be cybersecurity specific. Every company has incidents, operationally or through security. So I think, anyone would be prepared. It'd be nice if you had an incident response plan. That's typically what we have people refer back to. Like, no one has it memorized. But yeah, I don't think anyone's too inexperienced to have one, assuming they're willing to learn and, they're okay having gaps and opportunities.
And on the other end, do you test out of it? Do you just move to just live red team exercises, or do you still build tabletops interweave the tabletops with those red team exercises?
I personally think it's still really good to have the muscle memory. Typically you have turnover, and if there's someone who's no longer with the company, I bet they're not training that next person specifically for tabletops. I've also seen tabletops where the main incident commander or the CISO maybe, they're taken out of the room. So the person who normally lead it, all of a sudden they had a death in the family, and now they can't help. So you just throw someone else, the backup person, under the bus and figure out how prepared they are for it. So there's a lot of different ways you can go with it, where I'm sure there are some companies who feel like they don't need it, but I've always seen value no matter what.
So you throw in that chaos monkey.
Yeah.
You
just made me think of a question.
Chaotic. Yeah, go ahead, Lee.
Have you had, I'm thinking about success stories. Have you had somebody get back, remember that tabletop we did together? I had to freaking use it and I nailed it kind of thing? Or it was harder than I thought, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I've had it happen before where been at a company where we've done incident response and tabletop exercises and then had an actual incident. We had all of our templates ready. I think another common recommendation for tabletop exercises is to have out of band communication. So whether your Teams or Slack goes down, or the threat actors in the environment and they're potentially monitoring your communication tool, having something like Signal to communicate out of band is really helpful. And in the incident, we already had those groups set up. So my boss had a Signal group set up with all the executives. I had a Signal group set up with our infrastructure and service desk teams. So yeah, I would argue we were really prepared. And we had a really good understanding of what it took from the different groups, who was on point, how do we find out who's on call. So I think things went smoother than they would have before the tabletops.
All right, good stuff. Ryan is available if you need a tabletop. Hopefully this helped people understand tabletops better and the importance of going through them and figuring out what's going to fail when that fateful day hits you and you find yourself in a ransomware situation or BEC or whatever it might be. But Ryan, thank you so much for joining us on Enterprise Security Weekly today.
Cool. Thanks for the opportunity. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, great conversation. We will be right back in a few moments with the weekly enterprise news. Lots of good stuff to chat about. Do the words free time or relaxation sound foreign to you? Perhaps you've been stuck in the office too long, battling cyber threats or worrying about the next strain of ransomware. Let Sophos help provide peace of mind 24/7, 365 with cybersecurity delivered as a service. Because we want you to get back to your weekends, family dinners, and everything in between. And you'll get there with Sophos. Visit securityweekly.com/Sophos to learn more. If you work in security or IT and your company has Okta, this message is for you. Imagine a world where only secure devices can access your cloud apps. In this world, phish credentials are useless to attackers, and you can manage every OS, even Linux, from a single dashboard. Best of all, you can get employees to fix their own device security issues without creating more work for IT. The good news is, you don't have to imagine this world. You can just start using Collide. Visit securityweekly.com/Collide to watch a demo today. That's securityweekly.com/KOLIDE. Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. Join us at an upcoming official cybersecurity summit in a city near you. This series of one-day invitation-only executive-level conferences are designed to educate senior cyber professionals on the latest threat landscape. We are pleased to offer our listeners $100 off admission when you use code SECWEEK23 to register. Visit securityweekly.com/cybersecurity summit to learn more and register today. Now for the Enterprise Security Weekly news. Check out securityweekly.com/ESW332 if you want to follow along as we go through the news, or if you want to click any of the links to the articles or stories that we're covering today. And we have with us Katie Teitler and Tyler Shields. Hey, guys.
Hello.
What's up,
Hello.
Adrian?
Thanks for joining me.
Yeah.
And you look like you're in a lovely hotel room somewhere.
Yes, I got you both to speak at the same time. That was my goal.
You did. Well done. You got a sunny Orlando, huh?
Yeah, it's sunny and extremely rainy. It's alternating today. So yeah, I lost power and internet during one of the previous segments. Managed to jump onto my phone and then jump back from my phone to the landline. So hopefully there's no more drama in this segment. All right, so less stories today, but there's some big ones. There's some dollar signs with B's behind them in today's stories here. So we'll cover the money side of things before we move on to other stuff. Right up top, we've got funding. Cato Networks raises a Series H. I'm not sure where this is at this point. They're labeling it as just a venture round, but some stats here. They're about 8 years old. Lightspeed Venture Partners was the lead investor here, also led the last 4 rounds. This company was founded and is run by Shlomo Kramer, very famous investor, Israeli investor. And the previous raise was a $200 million Series F, and they've been a unicorn for the last 3 raises. I think they were 1.2 something billion was their valuation on their Series E. And this is 2 after that. So they're talking about a $3 billion plus valuation at this point. So yeah, it's still
interesting. If we go one raise per letter, you said it was an H letter, H or E? No, it's H. A, B, C, D, E,
G,
G. 7, 6, 7, 8 raises in as many years? That is insane.
Yeah. That's
Why do you need that much money? I just don't get it.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I think it's a total of 700 something million that they've raised to this point. It's north of 700 million at a $3 billion valuation. I mean, that's just where we are these days with some of these. Yeah, and it's I want to say somebody mentioned that they are prepping for an IPO. So I think they're going the public route. They're not looking for. Well, I'm sure if the right acquirer came along, they would have that conversation. But I believe the rumor is they are prepping for IPO.
I mean, what a hit. What a hit. Shlomo Kramer, man, talk about a guy that can seemingly do it all. If they're big enough to actually go IPO right now on after this raise or because of this raise, that's impressive. That guy's got the golden touch. He is the Midas man of all things cybersecurity, really.
Yeah, and he's
been involved in so many projects.
He was one of the judges at Innovation Sandbox this year. When my company was up there giving its 3-minute pitch. When we were giving our 3-minute pitch, he was one of the judges. So yeah, always interesting to hear his thoughts on things too, because he's been around for a long, long time, has seen many market cycles. Also here, I kind of want to, before talking about any other funding, I kind of want to jump down to acquisitions and talk about what's going on there, because there's some big numbers there. CrowdStrike recently confirmed an acquisition of Bionic.ai, and I've already forgotten what Bionic.ai does.
Bionic is an ASPM, from my understanding. They're an application security posture management company.
Yep.
Which is super interesting, because that space I was hot to trot on. I thought it was going to be a very high growth, very interesting space. Did a number of investments in the space. And now it's like, oh no, what does that mean for application security vendors as a whole if CrowdStrike is getting in there and playing in that space and starting to become a player in application security on a broader play? What's going to happen? I think ASPM as a concept could just, we don't really want to rush down that path so fast, right? Now that we know who we're going to go up against and who the big boys are, I think that anything posture management, XSPM we'll call it, it's got to fold in. It's got to go to CrowdStrike. It's got to go to Palo. It's got to go to Wiz. It's anything XSPM is going to fold into that big, broad one ring to rule them all security play. And CrowdStrike wants to be involved in that conversation.
Yeah, our first interview was Merritt Maxim from Forrester, and that was one of the things we were talking about. That was in their 2024, security leader priorities report, was talking about everything posture management, and this being like a high value area. Like for a lot of these things, that's the only way you have any kind of usable visibility of what you've got is with these tools. And absolutely, there's a bunch of these are just destined to be folded in and consolidated.
Working in this industry specifically, this is something that we're taking a look at very closely, because when our company started, others in the industry, similar ones, who started 3, 4, 5 years ago, this was a space that was ripe for innovation. But at this point, even this space, the security posture management of, insert previous letter, it's just becoming in and of itself. You can't just take posture management in a silo. It has to incorporate everything else, because otherwise, what is posture? It's exposure management. It's vulnerability management. It's identification. It's policy and control. It's risk rating. It's just so encompassing that even in the 2 years that I've been where I am, I'm looking at a space that is no longer this big. For those of you listening, I'm making a little circle with my hands, and it's gotten enormous. And we're trying not to do the typical security vendor marketing garbage where we say, we're your single bullet, silver bullet thing, whatever, most companies say, but it becomes harder and harder.
It's a single pane. Just say
it is single pane of glass. Yeah, a silver bullet, bleeding edge technology. How many of these can we put in there? It's AI assisted bleeding edge single pane of glass technology.
There it is. There it is, folks. That's the sound bite.
You hit the marketing buzzword bingo.
Woohoo! Won something.
But it makes sense for it all to be together, because this is all hygiene governance type stuff. That's like just making sure all the boxes are checked. Did you use the right configuration, or did you configure a bunch of risky stuff? Did you fully offboard that employee, or did you miss a few things? Like, it's just all this just process stuff where there's just really simple stuff that can fall through the cracks that can bite you in the butt pretty hard if you miss it.
For sure. For sure. And we will get to this.
You don't want that spread across 7 products, do you? You want all that in one place, right?
Yeah, and
I would.
And in some sort of automated fashion, I know the A word is a little bit of a dirty word to some practitioners because they think, oh no, I have to check everything. But this is not, considering the amount of stuff that's in use, users, devices, data repositories, clouds, containers, blah, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You have to do this in some sort of holistic way. You can't just have some guy sitting behind a keyboard going, oh, look, tap, turn that off. Oh, look, there's something else. Tap, turn that off. It doesn't work. We've seen it a million times where you have literally a guy behind a keyboard trying to shut off access piecemeal and, oops.
Yeah. You're going to miss something. Yeah. Yeah. So the biggest number in the show notes today for the news is 28 billion. That's not
number. The biggest number in the news today. That's the biggest number in the news.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's so Cisco acquires Splunk in a cash deal worth $28 billion. And
that's a lot of cash.
Is this the biggest cybersecurity deal ever? Have there been any bigger than this? I can't recall. I think the teens is as high as anything's gone, right? Like breaking up McAfee and Symantec. I think some of that might have been up in the double-digit billions, but I don't recall anything even close to 28. And they call it a cybersecurity company. I don't know if I'd call Splunk a pure play cybersecurity company. I feel like I know folks who use it, for log management for stuff that isn't specifically a security use case.
Definitely being billed as a cybersecurity acquisition for sure. Just to discuss the largest versus not largest question, I just did a quick Google for largest cybersecurity acquisition. That's it, and it came up with Splunk. So, according to Google, on a random, completely unscientific search, it thinks that it's the largest in history. Now, that being said, it also does give the fact that it is the largest acquisition ever done by Cisco as well, which in and of itself, Cisco's acquisitory for over 2 decades now. They've been buying companies. So, for them to make this big of an all-cash play is absolutely massive. I mean, that's a lot of bathtubs full of greenbacks there to make a $28 billion acquisition. So, it's kind of neat to watch this one go down. I agree with you. Is it a cyber acquisition? Is it not? I would argue that Splunk is largely a cyber company now, but certainly it is a event correlation company, which directly contributes to, cyber needs, right? Events and event correlation is directly a part of general cyber requirements. So I would classify it as a cyber acquisition. I think it might be the biggest in history.
What is the total addressable market
for SIM?
Yeah,
for all of cyber.
Considering the where it is, how old it is, what companies already have deployed.
I want to say all of cyber is somewhere around 150, 180, something like that at this point, and I think that even includes services, right?
Okay, so you just answered the question I didn't ask. Is the total addressable market worth $28 billion?
Is Splunk worth $28 billion? Yeah, I don't know.
Oh my! Check out this.
Well, and this is a time when we're expecting companies to be paying to get good deals, right? Like cheap.
Well, that is not synonymous with Splunk.
Right. Well, no part of Splunk. You don't hear the word cheap. What were you sharing, Tyler?
Yeah, check out this interesting data point I just dug up. Prior to the Splunk deal, Cisco's biggest deal ever was the cable set-top box maker Scientific Atlanta in 2006. Do you want to hazard a guess as to the size of that acquisition, the second largest one they've ever done?
I'd say it'd have to be
572 million.
No, I'd say it's
72 million with an M. It's in the billions.
Yeah, it's got to be in the billions because SourceFire was in the billions, and that was 2011.
So
or
what's
something
the second biggest?
So second biggest, I'd say 12 billion.
It's only 6.9. I was shocked. So they've gone from 6.9 billion being their largest acquisition of, if you remember back when set-top boxes were a thing, the largest set-top box manufacturer on the planet was Scientific Atlanta. Pretty much they were in every home. And that was a $6.9 billion purchase in 2006 to being a $28 billion acquisition. Massive jump. What's really interesting on that, too, is it's about 13% of Cisco's market cap that they're putting to work here by making this acquisition. So if this one doesn't work, it is a massive, massive problem for Cisco.
That's a big write-down. This is also the same company that acquired and divested Linksys, right? Like Linksys had to have been a pretty big acquisition, big consumer electronics company. Like most of the wireless access points at one point were either D-Link or Linksys for a long time, right?
Yeah, according to my rapid Google foo, Belkin and its subsidiaries, including Linksys, were acquired by Foxconn for $866. Cisco buys it doesn't say. $500 million, all stock deal to buy Linksys.
Wow.
$500 million.
That's crazy. Wow. I guess it was a low margin business being like stuff you put in Best Buy, right? Stuff you.
Yeah, I mean, it's insane. But if we think about the strategic reasons why this makes a whole lot of sense, right? Cisco has been pushing hard to become relevant in cloud. They want to become just as important as Palo Alto Networks as on a go-forward basis. And one way to do that is to make an acquisition of one of the largest, if not the largest, event management system on the planet. You couple that with all of the data that you're getting off of I think they acquired DivvyCloud, they acquired a couple of other cloud properties, plus your authentication systems with Duo, with that acquisition, and you quickly realize how important that central anchor is in your strategic offering. They didn't really have a central anchor. They had peripheral anchors. Now they can anchor everything by shuttling that data back into Splunk as the core central repository of data management for them, and I think it's a very smart acquisition.
Yeah. I mean, Splunk,
price debate aside, it's a smart acquisition.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see what they do with it. If they cut the prices for the services, I think Splunk could maybe thrive. But when was the last time you heard the name Splunk without also hearing about a complaint about how much it costs? It's like,
Never.
They must have tons of churn, and must have some considerable issues to deal with there, but still worth $28 billion apparently.
Yeah, I mean, you also still got to get through regulators. I don't think it'll be an issue, but this is an intent to purchase. This is not a complete close, so you got to get past the regulators, and there's all sorts of hurdles that could still terminate this deal before the cash exchanges hands.
Well,
$28
sure,
billion in a buyer's market. Sorry,
from the regulation point of view, I know a lot of people have been talking about that today, but I don't, not that there's anybody who's at the level of Splunk in terms of, quote, depth and breadth of product or the customer base that they have. But there are plenty of other companies out there that do something similar enough that I don't know how you could say, oh, this is a monopoly. I don't see it.
Yeah, Splunk has a ton of competitors. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't see how regulators would come in and be like, no way, this is going to create one big player and that's all. No, there's just too much competition, not just with Splunk, but with other, like you said, it's not just them, it's Microsoft, and there are a lot of other companies who are trying to become the next cybersecurity player. We've talked about a lot of them on this show, that they're not squarely in cybersecurity, but they're acquiring cybersecurity companies because they want to go up against the Palos. They want to go up against Cisco and Microsoft and all of those. They, the whizzes of the world, they want to become that, and the easiest way to do it is to buy.
Yep. In 2023, Cisco has acquired 4 companies focused on security. Armor Blocks, a threat detection platform called Armor Blocks. ORT, which goofiest name in history, OORT, ORT, does identity management.
The ORT, I think.
And Valtix and Lightspin, which are both in cloud security space. So clearly they've been on the acquisition train this year. Not surprising. Also, what's interesting is should Splunk walk away from this deal, there is a $1 billion breakup fee to Cisco. So they have significant skin in the game not to walk away from the deal before close.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just thinking here, so Microsoft has Sentinel. That's basically a SIM, right? But I'm not even sure if you could call it a SIM, because I'm not sure if it really works as like a general purpose SIM. But then Palo Alto doesn't really have a SIM, do they? I don't recall them having anything SIM related. So I'm just trying to think here, like who are they competing with? Who are the big guys out there that are based around a SIM? Like all of a sudden, like Elastic has been doing a bunch of acquisitions. They now have endpoint security and log management, all that under one roof. Threat Intel, I think, also. So it might be interesting to do some looking around and seeing like, okay, post Splunk, like what does the market look like? Who are the competitors here? And does Microsoft and like Sumo Logic was acquired by Francisco Partners, so it went the PE route. Is that ready to get picked up? That was a $1.7 billion deal. That's maybe an easy catch up for Palo Alto or Microsoft here if they want to compete here. I don't think CrowdStrike has a SIM yet, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure, but they all have to have engines, right? The one ring to rule them theory means that there has to be some kind of central core data collection component, whether it sits in a data lake, whether it sits in a SIM. There has to be some kind of central repository for all of these systems that they want to build over time. You could make the argument that SIM is one of them, SOAR could be one of them. The broader data lake that Palo is trying to build becomes one of them. Wiz clearly has a centralized data lake that could become one of them. I look at it this way. There's 2 sides of this coin. There's the events that are happening in your environment, and then there's the state information of your environment, right? So you kind of have the context and you have the events. Either one of them can be the core. Either one of them can be the core of what the data you're collecting is, and then you overlay it with the other. Cisco's clearly taking the approach here that SIM will become the core, that the event systems will become the core. I think Wiz is taking the opposite tack, that's saying that context and state data becomes the core, and then we will overlay event data on top of that. Who knows who's right in the longer term? One other thing I want to bring up about a lot of the articles I've been reading about this acquisition is during the announcement this morning, during the very short press call I think they did, they spun it super heavily around AI, around Splunk having AI capabilities, right? And of course they're going to spin it that way.
Yeah.
But how much real AI beef does Splunk really have? How much meat is behind that? I think that's a fundamental question.
We cover a lot of news here. Like we usually have 30, 40 stories every week. Do you recall any Splunk AI announcements?
Not a single one. It doesn't mean I don't have one. I just don't recall one. Yeah. So anyways, it feels like a bit of marketing fluff around that. But yeah,
I still posit that most AI, in air quotes, is just machine learning. I know we're calling it AI, but it's just a lot of math. There's a lot of math and not a lot of sentience in most things.
Or the other M word, it's mostly marketing.
Oh, yes, mostly marketing, yes. But if you put AI in front of anything, apparently you get lots of money these days. So why not?
Yeah.
That dreaded M word, marketing.
So Tyler, talking about, needing that engine, needing that central piece, we've seen Elastic move into cybersecurity, try and become a cybersecurity vendor. What about Snowflake? Snowflake has a ton of cash. What would they be like if they wanted to? What?
I freaking love Snowflake from that angle, from where you're going with this thing, because who else I like too is Databricks from that same angle.
Yeah. Both have tons of cash, doing really well in the market.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan right now of systems that collect massive amounts of context, of data. Context is my key word for 2024. What is cybersecurity? Everything we do, it's all contextual, right? As a human being inside of cyber, you are tracking down an attacker. Okay, great. Well, what's the context around what they broke into? What's the context around the TTPs that they did? The attack methodologies, the exploits, the state of the systems they were breaking into. That's all the context, right? And literally, if you ever think of anything in cyber, you can always break it down to, well, I need more context to make a decision. Well, we're in a situation now, I think the world in cyber is in a situation now where we have that context for a change. Right? And if to directly answer your question, storing that context in Snowflake or storing that context in Databricks is a fantastic way of connecting the dots and providing rapid access and queryable access to the context so that humans or artificial intelligence, who cares which it is, can make smart decisions out of that context. And I think if we're going to talk about investing in cybersecurity going forward, there's an AI pick and shovels, if you understand that term, pick and shovels investment play to be done for both Snowflake and Databricks as an underlying platform that will support whatever data lakes get built on top of it, whatever security lakes get built on top of it.
And one of the things that made me say it is, that's one of those logos I keep seeing come up when I look at people's technical partners on the cybersecurity side. Like tons of companies are already plugged into Snowflake as both a platform, something to protect, something to build on top of. There's some cybersecurity products out there where you don't have a choice where to put your data. They just standardized on Snowflake, and they're like, all you need is our product and Snowflake, and like they're our data side. We just decided to build on that because it was, easy, it scales, and we don't have to build it ourselves.
Well, I think there's a lot of data guys and gals out there, data nerds out there that'll know this way deeper than me. Those fundamental subsystems, as opposed to using like an S3 bucket or even an Elasticsearch to a degree, those fundamental subsystems are allowing relationships to be connected between data points in ways that are queryable faster than any other system, right? So I read an article just this week about, I think it was Databricks. Don't hold me to that. It's one of the two, Databricks or Snowflake, where they allow, they just launched or allow now a fast vector connection engine on top of it, which again, just speeds up queries, right? Speeds up the ability to ask complex questions of your data sets. That's all AI really fundamentally needs is a massive amount of data and then the fastest way and the cheapest way to ask questions of that data. And if you have that infrastructure, AI becomes viable, right? And so it's really exciting times now, I think, for both of those companies, not just in cyber, but across the board, but certainly as fundamental building blocks to cyber products.
Well, look at how data science teams have exploded in engineering teams for cybersecurity vendors over the last 5 years. There's a lot of cybersecurity vendors that have significant data science teams now.
Yeah, most of them. So I would argue most of the good ones.
Yeah, I think that speaks to the trend that you're pointing out also. All right, so on the more negative side here, we've got a non-acquisition. We've got some details on what happened between Cisco and SentinelOne. I feel like there's some reading to do between the lines here. Tyler, what do you think happened here?
Oh man. I mean,
have you had a chance to look at this?
Yeah, I definitely have read it. I'm not going to comment on malicious intent of SentinelOne with regards to their numbers. So to summarize for the audience who may not have read the article that we're going to be discussing, Cisco was apparently really close to acquiring SentinelOne, and I'm going to paraphrase mostly from the write-up that you did, Adrian, here. Cisco was apparently very close to acquiring SentinelOne. SentinelOne, quote, discovered a gap between the ARR it previously presented and the actual expected revenues. So, listen, for those of you who know how accounting works, you would think it's math and you would think 1 + 1 always equals 2, but really that's not how accounting works in many, many different ways, right? There's lots of different buckets you can apply things to. And I'm not going to say that SentinelOne did anything nefarious or negative, but what I will say is it It was a disconnect from the way Cisco wanted accounting to occur. And because of that gap, SentinelOne eventually changed its ARR calculation method to reflect more accurately. I don't know if they did it to try to get the deal done, or if they did it because it's, correct GAAP accounting principles. It's still TBD. Whatever the case may be, Cisco said, thanks, but no thanks. We're not going to dance with you at the dance. You're no longer pretty enough. Whether the new numbers were not pretty enough, or whether the fact that SentinelOne could not properly do math was not pretty enough is TBD. Only the insiders are going to know why it all fell apart. But at the end of the day, it changed from a $8 to $9 billion deal to maybe a $6 to $7 billion deal, and then the terms were too far apart, and Cisco said, "Nah, we'll pass."
Yeah, and there is a note at the end that SentinelOne's working with Catalyst Partners to find a new buyer, and Cisco could still return this time at a reduced price. So, thank you for that summary, Tyler. You were much more diplomatic than I was going to be.
Much more diplomatic than you thought I would probably be, too.
Yeah, I thought it might be a hot take, but we don't have the graphic up for that. Yeah, and I was thinking of putting up the dumpster fire graphic for this, but I don't think that's fair either. It's not like it's not like the Cyber Reason deal where they went down a order of magnitude in value. Like this is, truly $8 to $9 billion to $6 to $7 billion. It isn't the end of the world.
Yeah, I'm actually just opening up my my trade desk right now to tell you where they currently stand. Let's see.
I think it's just shy of 5. Yeah, just shy of $5 billion. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 4.89 with a 1-year graph that shows a decrease from about 28, 29 on the high down to 15. So, I mean, it has definitely been crushed the last calendar year, 1 year. From it's just being destroyed, but down to 4.89. And obviously, if you find a bunch of math that says the $8 to $9 billion offer you are putting in front of somebody is really worth, 5, 6, 7, you're going to walk. You're going to walk all day. You'll never get that deal done when it's that far apart. So, maybe 4.89, let's call it a 20% premium, 30% premium. On top of that is what it might go for. So 5.5.
5.5, 6.
6. Yeah.
Yeah. And then one more acquisition.
If you look back even further, just FYI, if you look back even further, it's actually down from a peak of over 75.
20.
Down to 15.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, but market cap was hit 20 at some point, I think, is what the article said.
Yeah, the per share valuation was over 75 to 80 at its peak, and it's now currently sitting at 15.91 as of right now.
Yeah, which isn't that far off everybody else. Like, everybody's down quite a bit for the most part, right? Still?
Yeah, that's pretty damn massive for a publicly traded company. But yes. I mean, you could certainly put it to 2022 being a tough market and the first part of 2023 being equally tough. But listen, you don't go that far down if you have really good numbers, metrics, and output. So it's either the buy of the century right now because it's so low, or it's going to get acquired pretty quick here.
Yeah. All right, so the last acquisition piece to talk about is a rumor that Palo Alto Networks is in negotiations to acquire Talon Cybersecurity, very typical kind of Israeli rumor mill. So we've been talking about enterprise browsers for not that long. I think I've been the main host of this podcast since before secure enterprise browsers was a term, and already we're talking about one of them exiting.
Adrian, let me eat crow. Let me eat my hat. Let me eat crow. I hate this market. I've always hated this market, but good for them if they can get $600 million on this acquisition.
It doesn't mean it has value. I mean, maybe
it's worth $600 million, but it doesn't have value to the buyer.
Right. Yeah, to the buyer. We've seen plenty of acquisitions where the product just disappears and you never see it again, right? And they just couldn't sell it. The salespeople couldn't push it. Nobody wanted it. But yeah, I've been very, I don't know. I'm not convinced on this market at all. I'm not convinced anybody's looking at Chrome Enterprise and saying, yeah, it's just a pile of crap. Give me something that's I don't know, $50 a user, and I have to install it on all my endpoints in addition to another browser, and then somehow have to enforce them to only use that browser and not the default built-in browser. Like now I have to prevent them from using Safari and Edge. I don't know how any of that works. I know some CISOs that are really love this market, some CISOs who have invested in this market, and yeah, I'm just not convinced that it's going to be anything more than a niche product.
God, what a multiple. If they can get picked up for 600, that would be absolutely crazy. They employ about 130 people right now.
Rumor, deal isn't done. We'll see.
Rumor, deal isn't done.
So, what'd you say, Katie? I talked over you.
I was just going to say, I mean, I think we've just all seen that the value of something in cybersecurity doesn't necessarily make it real, right? Like everybody assumes that if somebody gets bought, if somebody gets an investment, if there's some sort of activity, that makes it really good or a real market. And it's not. It's just trends, and it's just people who have done an analysis on whether or not they can personally make money. It's not about the efficacy of the technology. It's not about Tyler's going to kill me right now, but it's about what somebody can make money off of. It's not about necessarily improving cybersecurity, and I'll probably be fired and nobody will hire me ever again, but it's business. This is not about improving security all the time. It's not.
We have an article on this topic, number 14, by Ali Mellon from Forrester, is saying exactly what you're saying, Katie.
I swear to God, I didn't read it. I've been, neck deep in work stuff. I swear to God, Ali, I didn't steal anything.
So before we run to the blob discussion, $600 million deal, 130 employees. That's pretty impressive number per employee on an exit.
Invested, I think 130 raised,
125 million invested today. Yep, okay. Including $100 million Series A in August of 2022. Listen, if they pulled that in August of 2022, they had to be doing okay, right? It was post collapse, so they may surprise me. And maybe 600 million is an actual real number that does make sense, and I'm just uninformed, which is highly probable. Most of the time on this show, I'm just kind of hand waving a lot of stuff, so it's highly probable. But I think at the end of the day, I'm going to flip a coin and say that this one comes up tails and does not get closed at 600 million. It will not close. That's my prediction on this one.
All right. Yeah, so number 14 is kind of saying what Katie was just saying. So Allie's, and she's drawing an analogy with the defense industry here, I think, where she's basically saying it's possible within markets, for this bubble to form, where everybody's just kind of convincing each other and patting each other on the backs that they built these amazing things, and you look at it 5-10 years later in hindsight, you realize like they were all just, bullshitting each other. It was just, there was nothing actually there. But they had convinced themselves of that, whether they actively knew that they didn't really have a whole lot of value there, and it was just good salesmanship, we don't know. We don't always know that in hindsight, but we've certainly seen that in the security industry. We've seen markets that claim to be, this is going to be the end of malware, and stuff like that. And they don't take into account basic things like usability. Like I'm specifically talking about application control there. When Bit9 was, we saw analysts, I think it was an analyst from IDC who was like, with application whitelisting, now what we call app control, you just give a check mark next to all the programs you can run, and then the malware can't run, right? Problem solved. It turns out it's not that simple. So,
yeah. Listen, man, I love Allie. This is a great article, but business follows the trends and waves, right? And what she's saying is that the trends and waves are self-inflicted, and she's 100% right. Right? They come off of commentary of pundits. They come off of commentary of CISOs. They come off. But you know what? That's the whims of a market, I think, in a general sense. You could take this entire concept that she's writing about and literally apply it to any other market. You could apply it to consumer packaged goods, CPG markets, and just say that the whims of the markets push this direction, and businesses are smart enough to say the trend moves this direction, so we create our sunglasses with a red tint because that's where the new direction is, right? It's no different in cyber. And she's right. The sad part is that we're creating rose-colored glasses, no pun intended to the story I was just saying, but we're creating, certain fulfill the gap of who, when demand exists, we build it for them to buy it. We don't build it to secure anything. And she's not wrong, but that is the base of what business should be.
But a lot of that demand is also created by the industry, I feel like. That's the hype machine, right?
I think there's some of that. Sure.
You need AI.
Yeah, it whipsaws. For sure. And that demand can come from a pundit who catches the viral nature of what they're saying and people glom onto it and it goes, or it could come from a bunch of CISOs. Like last year, the big thing was CISOs pressing saying we need product unification, we need less point solutions, bigger, broader platforms. And look at what Palo pitches on Q4. They pitch we're going to be the biggest one ring to rule them platform on the planet, right? Yeah. So it doesn't matter where that initiation comes from. It gains momentum and it becomes a trend or a market movement that markets will get behind because there's money to be made. I don't think there's a problem with it. That's the definition of capitalism. But really what is the problem is that we're no longer solving the problem of risk. We're going wherever the business dictates. The business will always do that because that's where money is meant to be made.
Can I take us down a complete rabbit hole?
Sure.
We have time for that? So sure. I have been pondering for perhaps a decade and still haven't come up with any answer. As somebody who... I like the graphic. Nice.
Thank you. The whole graphic. That's great.
I love that rabbit hole graphic for those that aren't watching.
I love that graphic, and I love the purple.
Oh my God.
So as somebody who formerly planned content and got the speakers for conferences, I was always fascinated by which speakers got the highest ratings, which speakers got the most attendance. And it's the same with blogs and articles. And I've never really been able to pinpoint why there are certain people. I'm just going to talk about cybersecurity because that's my industry. It happens in every industry, but this is my industry. So this is my question about this industry. Why there are certain people who on the surface don't seem to be any smarter, harder working, more educated, but they have these groups. They have groupies. They have fan boys, girls, and people. And I've never been able to figure out systemically how certain people get there. But it's these people, when they say something on X, formerly Twitter, or LinkedIn, or at a conference, or in a podcast, how certain people, because you can be really smart and really well educated and do a ton of research. You can write a great blog, and maybe you get 4 people reading it. Whereas I have definitely seen people who write things and they're not really coherent. They're rife with typos and grammatical issues and sort of sketchy details that may be true or may not be substantiated through research. And they really have these fan clubs. And so I constantly try to figure this out. So I'm wondering if either of you have any insight into how this happens. Like, I think Ali's thing, I swear to God, I didn't research this. I jumped on this call 2 seconds before and I was knee deep in website copy. How does somebody like Ali say this? And let's say she can go one of 2 ways. This can blow up and it can be the reality next year, or it can fizzle, right? But what makes those people who blow up for no apparent reason blow up, and others who are probably smarter, more researched, well thought out, rely on actual data, they have an audience of like 2.
I do have a thought.
Go ahead. I do too, but you go first.
Well, it's not just research. It's not just capability. We don't live in a pure meritocracy, right? I think a piece of it is that. I also think of a piece of it as entertainment. I think a piece of it could be even, the potential drama or train wreck that comes with that individual. I think a piece of it could be how well they dance and entertain on stage. Like there's so much more. Essentially what you're asking is what makes a cybersecurity influencer, right? And that's the hard part, right? Listen, you could have 50 to 70% of the research capability of someone else. But if you present better and make people laugh and make people want to come, they're going to keep coming back. I've seen some of the worst researchers on the planet over the last 20 years garner massive audiences because they get up there and they don't care and they make fools of themselves and people want to watch the train wreck, right? It's you could almost call it the Kardashian version of cybersecurity, right? They're not there because Kim is intelligent. They're there because she's a train wreck and we want to watch her wreck the train into the wall, right? I think there's so much more to it when it comes to influencer marketing. Yeah.
So I want to add to that, and I think, and this is more of a component that you can control and isn't negative, but consistency. Like a lot of the success I've seen out there is just consistency, and so going down a more positive route, constant self-improvement and consistency. So. Like if you look at a lot of famous YouTubers, their very first YouTube videos are on there, and they'll have just like you were saying, Katie, 4 views, 10 views, and the videos are terrible. And what they were trying out didn't work, but what got them there is they recognized what did work and what didn't work. They were looking at the data. And they kept trying things, and that consistency was there, and they just never gave up because ultimately they were doing it for themselves. They're trying to put together something that they would want to watch, that's they would want to consume, and they eventually got there, and other people agreed with them. And that's kind of what I do with this podcast. Is I figure generally if I'm confused by something or curious about something, there's some portion of the public, people that want to listen to a show like this are also going to be confused or curious about. So I just lean on that. I don't do a whole lot of market research. I hear something, I'm like, oh, that sounds like hypey bullshit. Let's dig into this. Let's have somebody come on and talk about it, and I mean, going that selfish route that what do I want to see, has paid off. I think.
But Adrian, I agree with you here. This is where, I've known you for a long time now, and I can definitely say that your commitment to things is incredibly impressive and always has been.
No, Adrian is 100% hypey bullshit. Just saying.
Okay, fine. But no, I'm serious. Like when I first,
all things should be. Thank you, guys.
Right. When I first met you, you were kind of a different person. You weren't a bad researcher or writer or whatever. That's not what I'm saying. So please, nobody interpret it that way. But I've definitely seen your commitment to that. But I've also seen people who just don't. And I think it's great when somebody is committed.
There's some really bad talks on YouTube. You can find me delivering some really bad content on YouTube.
I'm sure you can find anybody, but I've also seen people who just, they don't, I'm thinking of one person in particular, and I'd never call this person out by name, but I don't get it. And it's Tyler, you're right. I consistently see this person posting on social media and people are just like, oh, and I'm like, because I can look at this person from 10, 15 years ago and say, they haven't changed. They haven't grown. They just listen to their own bullshit and do it over and over again. And I think there are people who do try really hard. And then there are other people who just, they say, the grass is green, and people go, yay! And they're like, yes, we're going to talk about the grass for the next 10 months. And it's like, I don't know, this question.
I don't know. Maybe some people don't have the BS filters that we've built being analysts, and you've been part of speaker selection processes and stuff like that. Like you read enough of this stuff, you look at enough of this stuff, and you start to see the holes. And like it's, some people can talk about nothing for as long as you need them to, or as long as you want them to. And if you're not used to it, it's hard to recognize that. But yeah, at the end of it, if you're asked, okay, what are the 3 major points they made? Not sure there were any.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of different ways you can be. I think the key thing is providing value, right? So providing value can come in lots of different ways. It can come in education of, here's what I learned on this reverse engineering exploit, whatever, right? Like teaching. It can come in entertainment. It can come in honesty to your audience and saying, I don't know what the hell's going on, and you're going to learn with me, right? There's lots of different ways you can provide value. And I think, there's no, you don't have to be a cyber rock star that knows everything to provide value and be in these events. You can be in other situations and provide significant value to your audience. And that's the key thing.
And I think some people think you have to have some kind of amazing magic trick, reverse engineering, like thing that nobody's ever seen before. And that's one thing I've learned over time is like some of the simplest, stupid stuff that took me 5 minutes to throw together in a blog post gave people the most value. And it's stuff where I assumed, it's like, surely everybody's worked this out for themselves, or like I'm going to sound like an idiot putting this out there. And same thing, you go to YouTube, you go to Instagram, you go to TikTok, some of the stuff, like there are really basic stuff that, you figure out on your own, or maybe you learn from somebody else, that people don't know. And there's a lot of value in, don't second guess yourself on some of this stuff. Like there are whole accounts, that have these huge followings, and it's just like basic things you didn't realize. Is
that's good, but that I understand, that provides value. Some of the most basic stuff, I really think that is valuable, because a lot of people are afraid.
The ones that don't, I think it's more about the people than what they're saying. I think you could put it on mute and they would still consume all of their content on mute, right? Like I think it's more about like, I've chosen, to be a groupie of this person, and so they some kind of commitment, that they make.
All right. Those are the people I don't get.
Yeah. No, we don't get those people either, but we don't have to. It's just fandom is the thing, right?
I need more fans. I need more fans. Any fans out there that like me, please slide into my DMs and tell me how awesome I am, okay? Because I need more fans.
We need a merch store, and we need to sell those Tyler heads on our merch store.
I want a shirt with this bunny. I want a shirt with that bunny for sure.
Some of these graphics, we could make merch of these graphics. The rabbit hole, the dumpster fire. Well, I'm not sure if we can with all of it, but certainly. We should have a squirrel shirt.
Yeah, before we move on to the next topic, I want to call out Cyberburn and Fernanda for commenting in the Discord. They had a couple good comments that definitely fed into what I had to say. So thank you so much for putting those comments in there. We do monitor those comments in real time, so please put those comments into the Discord. We'll be sure to mention them, bring them in, or at least influence where we're taking our conversation. Thank you, Cyber.
Thank you for looking at that, because I normally monitor it in real time, because I usually have 2 giant monitors on either side of my teleprompter. But today,
I got you back tonight, Adrian. I got you.
I appreciate you. All right. I'm not sure we have a ton more time to go over stuff here. We do not have a squirrel story today. Maybe we can leave you with are there any particular ones here that you guys want to hit? Oh, your Cyber Y. We should hit your Cyber Y, number 13.
Oh, I love hitting my Cyber Y, because the more people I can get up to sign up for thecyberY.substack.com, the happier I will be. But what's up? Why are we hitting that?
I'll say from a personal point of view, because it's sitting in my inbox, I haven't gotten to it yet. So a rundown would be awesome.
No, it's specifically the terms of service change. This is a trend that I had not spotted. The get me a latte, ignore the TOS change.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a really cool thing, and I'm happy to bring that up. I don't remember exactly who found it. It's in the cyberwhy.substack.com. Please go ahead and subscribe. It's free. But one of the articles we brought in is an insider article about a long list of tech companies that are rushing to give themselves the right to use people's data to train AI. And it's companies like X, Instacart, Meta, Zoom, Rev, that in the last few months have actually gone in, tweaked their terms of service to essentially say, it doesn't matter what you send us, we're going to use all of it to train our AI to be better. I think at the end of the day, people are always saying, we're not going to stand up for these invasions of privacy. And, my comment here is my bet is the world won't care. When your unattended virtual assistant orders you your favorite Starbucks drink and has it delivered to where you physically are standing at 2:30 because it knows that your blood sugar is dumping and you need that Starbucks and you didn't ask for it and you didn't know it was coming and it lands in your lap, you'll give away every piece of privacy you have to have that Starbucks. So I think at the end of the day, you can choose to opt out of all these things. I don't think anybody will. I think everybody will be fine with it.
How much sugar are you putting in that latte?
What's that?
How much sugar are you putting in that latte that it's going to help your blood sugar?
Come on, lattes are full of sugar, aren't they? I don't know. Maybe I used the wrong word. Maybe I should have said mochaccino. I don't know.
I don't put sugar in my latte. A latte is
mocha.
just
I meant mocha. Mocha.
Coffee.
Mocha.
Yeah,
I meant mocha.
Milk has sugar. Milk has a decent amount of sugar, and most people are not like me.
Me on the sugar. Come on.
Most people don't drink plain lattes like me and you, Katie. They dump all kinds of syrups into it.
I will tell you a funny anecdote. When I first moved to Massachusetts, I grew up in New York State, went to undergrad in New York State, then went to grad school in Minnesota, and then I moved to Massachusetts. And to me, a regular coffee was a black coffee. I went into Dunkin' Donuts. This was maybe a week after I moved here, and they said, "What would you like?" And I said, "I would like a medium hot coffee." And they said, "How do you want it?" And I said, "Regular." And I got it, and I took a sip, and I almost choked because it was like licking a piece of candy. I was like, "What is in this?" They said, "You said regular coffee." I said, "Yeah, a regular black coffee, not decaf. Regular, not
cream
decaf.
And sugar. Regular cream and sugar.
Regular means 2 creams, 2 sugars. Blah.
Yeah, no, yeah, I'm a black coffee kind of guy.
Oh no,
myself.
No, I'm a creamer guy. Give me all sorts of creamer in there.
You're
Luckily,
a bourbon in the coffee kind of guy, so you know.
I substitute in stevia though because I'm trying to avoid the sugar. But there you go.
Yeah. All right. Let's see. So if you wanna, we'll leave you with a hot take. We're not going to dive too far into the hot take, but it's a good. I'm not saying X. It's on Twitter. It's the last story in the list here. But Nate Cash goes deep into some kumbaya here, trying to bring IT ops folks and security folks together. Kind of talking about the things that they clash over, and the reason that that there are some incentives for them to help each other out. But it's a long thread. It's a really good thread, and I recommend you check it out.
On X.
All right.
I love it.
And it's I'm not even sure if hot take is the correct thing to say, but it's certainly a hot take from the norm. But it's almost more of a compassionate hot take, right? Like, hey, you guys have more reasons to work together than to be enemies. All right. So, and on some positivity today. Thank you so much, Katie and Tyler, for joining me today. It's been awesome. A lot of laughs.
Always awesome to see you again, Adrian. Katie, you too.
Thanks, Tyler.
I did not have to enact any DR plans or BCP plans during this final segment, as I did in the previous two, minus any disasters next week. We'll be back. So big thanks to everyone watching or listening to this week's episode of Enterprise Security Weekly. We'll see you then.